Yeah. Strange geologic hotspot.
The meeting goes long, I'll pass it around.
Okay. I'll start. Dave can just come in.
Pardon me?
I did say no forever.
Okay, so we are going to begin the Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting for July 31st, 2019. I ask that everybody please silence your cell phones. If you have conversation you need to make, please take it out into the hallway. This meeting is being recorded. We ask that if you are recording either video or audio that you let us know. And then we will start with the public meeting, public comment on items that are not being heard before us tonight. Yes. Come on. Yep, as long as you speak into the mic.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce Mandel. I live in Nantucket, and I'm here to address an item that is not on your agenda, but it's something that the Concom has already dealt with. And particularly this pertains to the approval to allow Vineyard Wind to run its undersea cable through some Nantucket jurisdiction in the Muskegon Channel. We saw on the front page this week the town is having some issues. The town has reversed its unfettered support issued in November of Vineyard Wind now in order to try to address the damage being done to the historic landmark status and some other issues. So I'm here to ask the Concom to reconsider its prior approval based on new information that has recently come forward that would have likely affected your prior discussions. Maybe favorably, maybe not. But these new revelations are important, and we now have this information. As you know, in late 18 and 19, early 19, the BOEM issued a draft EIS seeking public comment. It's a lengthy document, hundreds and hundreds of pages. There were hundreds of comments submitted pointing out that the DEIS was seriously flawed, and although no one really sought to upend the project, we sought to seek mitigation measures. I wrote a lengthy document, and I'm going to leave it with you, but I've only marked certain issues in it that pertain to what I believe is the Concom's jurisdiction. I'm not going to talk about the right whales and things like that. I'm going to talk about wetland issues, undersea issues, benthic issues, and things like that very briefly. And what I'm seeking is for you guys to consider this information and perhaps to make this an agenda item sometime in the near future. It's not unheard of for an entity such as Concom that has made an approval to seek to revisit it based on new information that should have been made available. We know that the Block Island Wind Farm cable has to be replaced now because sifting sands and other issues have caused it to rise and be exposed. That same type of a cable is going to be through Nantucket's jurisdiction. We don't want that to happen here. Deepwater, Ørsted, same folks with Vineyard Wind and National Grid, are seeking to make the residents of Block Island and Rhode Island pay for the repairs. This is something Nantucket should make sure doesn't happen to it. NOAA has come out saying that the 200,000 volt cables, electromagnetic radiation, infrasound, and heat will disrupt the marine life in the area, disrupting the fishing industry, something that our folks are interested in. And recently, well, there were several entities that had to grant this approval because the cable ran through several jurisdictions. Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Edgartown, all had jurisdiction. The only Concom that did serious research, scientists, things like that, consultants. Edgartown denied permission for the cable. This has caused a slight hiccup in the process. They denied it because Vineyard Wind did not submit enough information to protect against short-term and long-term impacts from the cable, and that the offshore area was critical to marine fisheries and to storm protection and flood control. And they asked for additional mitigation measures. They're not trying to block the project, they're seeking to protect their jurisdiction. And it's something that I think Nantucket should revisit. The document that I'm going to hand out now is a consolidation of a very lengthy document. It's 11 pages. I don't expect you all to read it, but what it does is it goes into the various elements of the draft environmental impact statement, and it points out deficiencies, and it seeks mitigation. We're not looking to upend this project, or I'm not, although many people would like to. I believe that this project is going forward along with the other 5 projects. There's going to be 1,350 turbines out there. We are the guinea pig. And the Concom, I think, needs to reconsider some of the information. This document has a lot of information in it. I'm only going to, and I've highlighted certain things in it for you to look at. The electromagnetic field that the cable puts out disrupts sea turtles' communication and feeding and navigation. The soft seabed habitat is going to be destroyed. There are benthic issues and water circulation issues. There's fish and invertebrate habitat disruption. And of course, there are cultural impacts on Nantucket caused by this cable that could be mitigated. Instead of granting them unfettered approval, we could approve pending mitigation measures that are satisfactory. So I'm hoping that you'll take the time to look at a few of the things that I've highlighted in here, and I'm hoping that you will place this issue on an agenda in the future that we can address seriously. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Meanwhile, I've made copies here, and with your permission, I can hand them out.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. I might have enough for everybody.
I mean,
As long as I get one.
yeah.
Okay.
And I guess I have to ask Jeff, I mean, we've never opened up a closed.
We actually have before. I'll wait till he finishes handing out. I'll go through it.
Thank you. So I made enough copies. How about that? So that's my purpose, and I appreciate your allowing me to speak to you for a few minutes. And my sincere wish is that the Concom chooses to revisit this based on this new information, and we can have a serious discussion about getting some additional mitigation measures for Nantucket in addition to what the Select Board is trying to do. So if you have any questions, I'm here. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bruce.
So we have opened up a closed.
Sure. So we do have a provision under the code in the local bylaw that if new information comes forward that would have substantially impacted a determination, you do have the ability to kind of have a separate hearing to you essentially revoke the existing permit through that hearing and then would cause it to go forward from that. We've only operated under that hearing structure once before. Just to jog anyone's memory, I know Ernie was on the commission for it, but we did it once for the discussion involving the Pippin's Way subdivision as it related to the drainage features that were there. There was some information brought forward relating to groundwater levels specifically that caused that to happen. So obviously before we started any of that process, we'd probably want to engage town council to make sure that we're doing that correctly and that's within our rights to do. To simply schedule a discussion about the permit itself and this information is an agenda item and something certainly you guys have within your capability to do, and then you can decide what action you want to take from that point.
I have a question through the chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory if I'm mistaken, but weren't we talking within our purview of a very small length of the cable, and that was it?
Yes.
And also the cable length, the width was, I think it was demonstrated it was going to be, the trench was going to be between 3 and 6 feet wide, or even, I mean, very small.
In that neighborhood, there's
Yeah.
2 locations.
And I must say, having just flown into Amsterdam Airport 2 days ago, I flew past literally hundreds and hundreds of offshore turbines. And you go up the North Sea towards Germany, there are thousands of them. And so, I think probably this is beyond our purview. I would say that reopening it would really be, I don't think we, the actual tiny amount that we would be addressing, I think we have very little to object to.
I have a question.
Can you come up and speak before the mic?
It's a very quick question. How can we
We,
get a
we
copy?
need your
Oh,
name.
Val Oliver, ACRATS, Residents Against Turbines. I want to have a copy, if I may, of the order of conditions. It's not available online.
Sure. So I think given the information from Mr. Mandel, what we'll probably do, obviously won't happen while we're at the meeting, is I know the filing information and the orders don't often make it up because they're not part of the packet, but maybe we will address that through kind of how we have dealt with the Sconsa Bluff project and just create a separate page for Vineyard Wind and put all of that there. Or feel free to email or call our office and Joanne or I will send you a copy electronically, or you can get a paper copy. But we're certainly happy to send that along.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I have one comment to make, as I'm on the town wind turbine committee that has been working with outside counsel and experts to deal with Vineyard Wind, because as Bruce mentioned, it is very, very important because we are the guinea pig. And so the town has been working for the last 2 years to get Vineyard Wind to look at and agree to mitigation measures, which could involve money, could involve other things, which would go to the impact on the island, especially from a historic landmark point of view. And Nantucket is unique, of course, in being a historic landmark in and of itself. And so this is a case of first impression, if you will, on all fronts. And BOEM, the federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, has with the help of our council, the town has gotten them to reconsider their earlier offers, which were not substantial. And so this is an ongoing thing to get mitigation from them. Bruce mentioned this in terms of maybe this would be an additional way to get, frankly, more leverage, to get more mitigation within them. I'm not sure, but it's something that we should, if we decide to revisit this, I want to make sure we're, letting the select board, they're the ones handling it from the town point of view, so we all are on the same page and are aware of, we're all looking at the same information as well.
I guess, we had several hearings on this, and I can't remember, at least 3 or 4, and nobody came in and said, in Europe, I'm sure there's been tons of data collected on Europe and problems and issues. Nobody came in during those hearings and said, look, here's some problems with these things. I think, I don't remember hearing any of that.
No, well, and I think Ian is correct. Such a small portion was actually within our jurisdiction that the wind farm is actually outside of our control. essentially. So it's a very small section of cable that we were permitting. Yes.
I'd just like to address the comment.
Can you come
Bruce,
up and
would you
speak
come up
into
to
the mic?
microphone, please?
Sorry, just. I understand that certain people support wind energy and that we had past hearings I couldn't attend due to some cancer issues and whatnot. Just because no one came forward and mentioned some of the problems the European offshore wind farms are facing doesn't mean that there aren't problems. I can provide you with a long list of documents. As a matter of fact, some of them are referenced in what I just handed to you. So the fact that it wasn't pointed out doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that it's not worthy of being discussed and considered. So while no one thinks that these projects aren't going forward, the fact that we are, and I don't like the term guinea pig, but we are the first ones, we are setting precedent for all of the other wind development projects and lease areas, and there are 6 of them. If we have meaningful consideration of these issues, it sets the groundwork for going forward on how to protect our environment. And whether we have a very small area that the cable passes through, it's very narrow and shallow or deep, that's not the point. The point is the role of this committee is to help protect that area. And there's no fence on either side of the boundary that Nantucket's jurisdiction is on. And another Concom has found that more information is needed and harm is going to happen. NOAA has come out and said harm is going to happen. BOEM has come out and said this project will adversely affect Nantucket's designation as a National Historic Landmark. Not that it might, it will. I'm not looking to address that. I'm looking to address those items that I highlighted for you that I believe fall within the jurisdiction of this committee. And all I'm asking for you to do is look at it with as open a mind as you can have. And if you decide to revisit it, I would be happy to participate in that. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we'll read this and then decide if we want to put it on an agenda.
Sure.
Does that sound good? Okay. Any other public comment? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name's David Leggett, and I also live in Nantucket. I don't think I'm going to bring up any issues as important as those Mr. Mandel just brought up, but a couple sort of local issues in Nantucket. First of all, there's a place out on Little Neck Way, the owner of which I believe is Doug White, and he is putting stakes, metal stakes, out in the harbor, and he has put lines from no trespassing signs on each side of his land. Now, I've been walking that beach unmolested for over 50 years now, and the other night I was molested. I can't say any other way. My family was set upon, and we were even stalked on the way back in the guy in his pickup truck. So I'm just wondering, I was on the ZBA back in the 1980s. I last appeared before this commission in 1996. Good to be back. But what is, I'm only here in the summers. 3 weeks in August is all I'm here now. So I do not know what the history is. I just got the rude awakening the other night. So is there anybody on the commission who might be able to enlighten me as to what might be going on and whether you folks have dealt with this issue before?
I don't think we've dealt with this property specifically, but certainly if there's fencing that's going up through the wetland, that's something that Jeff and staff can check out.
Sure. I I know the police have been involved in that site, and I know there's a second site out in Nantucket that they've been involved with as well. And we've been trying to catch up with the officers for getting their reports and documentation from them. But that's certainly something that we'll look into.
I've heard tell, actually, that this particular gentleman has been known to call the police maybe 5 times a day.
Yes, that is
What's his
not
name
that
again?
is not inaccurate.
Doug White, I think, is the guy's name. And he sits up in the dunes. I swear he must have a duck blind and binocs. But you know, instinct. It was amazing. So it's not Nantucket in my mind, but hey. Another issue. Any other questions about that issue? And I'm basically trying to get more information, of course. There's another issue with a non-permitted dock on a parcel of land known as Lot C, which abuts Hither Creek, and K Street, which is now a town public way, which you access via Tennessee Avenue. And some of us have deeded rights to put boats there. You can even swim there according to the deed. If you really want to swim in Hither Creek, you can from that lot. But anyway, I was asked to move my boat by the new owner of number 39 Tennessee Avenue, who I believe is John and Christine Wolf are their names. And I've tried to work it out with them amicably. You know, I'm only going to be there 3 weeks. I'll be gone. You can have your dock back. But the point is, they do not own the land. They cannot get a Chapter 91 license. It's unpermitted, totally. So, has any of this come across the way? I know you've probably been talking about the Nantucket Marine situation and their request for additional dock or slip space across Hither Creek from this area. So I thought perhaps some of this might have come up.
I have heard nothing about an unpermitted dock there.
So
No, I haven't either. Being in Nantucket, it's
that
the
dock
first I've heard of this.
that has been there has been something that the harbor master's office has been dealing with for years now for access across that K Street property. There's a piece that's owned by the county of Nantucket, and they've been kind of looking into that and dealing with that. But I'm happy to catch up with Sheila. I know Dave Franzuto previously had been dealing with that dock, but I'm happy to catch up with her and get information back to you guys for the next meeting.
Yeah, Lieutenant Agnes McVicker was actually on the phone with me today, and we talked about the situation. And he was going to have the harbor master call it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because I don't think she wants to deal with it, because it's.
Well, we'll find out what's going on and get to the bottom of it.
They're bothering her about it, I think is what's going on.
Well, we can certainly find out. Get all of that there.
That would be great.
Has it been there for a while? You said that.
This particular dock, yes, it's been there perhaps, I would say, since the 1960s. It used to belong to a fellow by the name of Stephen Hurlitz, who is no longer with us. I think he died about 2003, but he used to have an ownership interest in Hither Creek Boatyard, aka Nantucket Marine. And so he had that dock, and he had a house up the way. And I think the boatyard hauled it in every winter, but apparently last winter it just sat there. There are 2 poles and a float in between. So that's the situation there.
Yeah, I know it's come and gone a few times through the years, depending on where it was, and it's had longer stretches. But I know it's always been a kind of a strange access issue across the county parcel that's
Right,
it
some of
actually
us
attaches
some of us
to.
have deeded rights to
Yeah.
the Lot C. And in the old days, of course, K Street was in a butter's way. But I think in the early 2000s, perhaps, the county took it as a road. So
Possibly.
there's a granite marker there now that says public way right on Tennessee Avenue as you go down K Street.
Yeah.
Is there any prior history of enforcement on this dock from the commission? Or?
In my recent memory, no. But we'd have to look back at if there's
Well,
been
I
any
appeared
previous.
before this commission in 1996, December of 1996, actually, on this issue. And the issue was not the dock per se. The issue was access down K Street because some of the abutters were objecting to me running a lawnmower down there. Just a hand lawnmower till you get down to the edge of the wetland, because we're not gonna mow the wetland, of course. So the upshot of that meeting was that I was just fine, and then one of the commissioners said, you know, it's a terrible day when a man has to get permission to use a lawnmower. But that's what he said, but.
So
So
that's
We
something.
can put it on.
Yeah, we can definitely look. We can even pull the minutes and tell people know that it was December '96
Stroll
ish.
around the stroll, you know, around stroll weekend of '96.
We can
Okay.
work in and around that time frame and track it down. I know that that's a lot that's had a lot of legal entanglements over the years for access across and things that
So
are there.
right now, I believe, given the fact that the town took K Street, we've got public access down there, and K Street does go right through the creek, but the dock is on Lot C, which is town-owned land now. It used to be owned by Franklin Bartlett, which he conveyed to the town some years ago.
Well, thank you for the information. We'll
Yeah,
definitely get
definitely.
Jeff to look into this
All
for
right, well,
us.
thank you for letting me talk.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your time on the island.
Any other public comments? Awesome. Okay, the following items are continued. Laz Family Nominee Trust is continued until August 28th. Gisela Leanhard is
Any numbers?
continued until August 14th. 115 Baxter Road LLC and 117 Baxter Road LLC are continued until August 14th. And then in certificates of compliance, we have Cambridge at 10 Medui Creek continued until August 28th. And Jennifer Silver continued until August 14th.
I have a question, Madam Chairman.
Yes.
The Mary D. Star and the Rays, 19 East Creek Road, they aren't on the package.
Yeah.
Yes, they're not.
No, so we actually, I'll apologize for this. I don't believe we'll be hearing those this evening. Those are both represented by Paul Santos. And I know Paul will not be here this evening because his mother passed away this last week. So we didn't receive any formal request. We're kind of waiting to see if someone came for those. But we were generally assuming that those were not going forward. So
I can just verbally request a continuance to the 14th.
perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
We
Brian.
understood why we didn't get some of the paperwork.
Yeah,
So
that's extenuating circumstances. Okay, so we will begin our notices of intent with Grant L. and Margaret C. Cambridge at 10 Medui Creek Road.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Kevin Beal for Grant J. Cambridge, and with me is wetlands consultant Brian Madden. My clients are the former owners of this property on Dewey Creek Road and seek an order of conditions to approve certain structures, portions of the wall and parking area that were constructed back in 2014. Since then, since this was filed, this notice, my clients have sold the property. But when we met together on July 3rd, we discussed this application, and you asked for a remediation plan, a planning plan that shows the plants to be planted in the portion of the 25-foot buffer zone. That plan has been filed for your review, prepared by Shampoo Landscaping. And it shows different plants: summer sweet, clenthra, inkberry holly, highbrush blueberry, and viburnum. Madam Chairwoman, you also asked about to identify the existing trees in this area. And those existing trees, which we'd like to keep, are swamp white oak trees that have been there for a while. But in terms of details, Brian's here to assist me if you have any questions.
Yep, Brian Madden from LEC. Planting plan is relatively straightforward. Total of 92 shrubs are being proposed. The commission had encouraged a robust planting effort, and hopefully this does the trick. And again, as Kevin had mentioned, those 3 saplings are young trees of swamp white oaks, and all native shrubs to be replanted within that lawn area, down gradient of the retaining wall.
Thank you. Any questions from the commission?
I had a question going back to this is the removal of the, making sure I've got this right. The part of what you're doing is removing a retaining wall, is that right?
We're asking to keep the
wanna keep
retaining wall in place.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, no, you're not asking to remove it, you wanna keep the retaining wall in place, and you're gonna revegetate on the kind of shore side of that, and then, but leave the lawn on the other side. I guess what I was wondering was, and looking at how the site is occupied by the buildings and such, that, and you mentioned that you think that removing the retaining wall would be more disturbing to the environment than keeping it and doing the landscaping you're doing. But I was wondering from a long-term point of view, and this is part of the property, it looks like it's the house and everything kind of faces the other way, and that's where the pool is and all of that. In terms of time and what have you, if you remove that retaining wall and let all of that go back to normal and replanted all of it with, proper vegetation, how do you come to the conclusion that that would be worse in any kind of long-term way?
Yeah, I think
Short-term, yeah, there'll be disturbance, but why not put it all back, to as close to what it was before, especially where it's kind of at the quieter end of the property.
Yeah, so certainly don't encourage building retaining walls in the 25-foot. But the way that we kind of approached it, looking at existing conditions, was the retaining wall causing any adverse effect on the resource area themselves. And everything's well established and stabilized at this point. Removing the retaining wall would set the clock back. We'd have to restabilize the soil material, get herbaceous vegetative cover going in advance of the shrubs going in. And given its location on the property in that northwesterly corner, abutting Medui Creek Road, certainly from like a wildlife habitat perspective, there's ample corridors being maintained along that westerly edge of the property. And again, we didn't want to cause a major earthwork project and to replant for what we're proposing right now.
Okay, I'm just concerned that it's looking at a short-term expense and disturbance versus a long-term, allowing property, within the 25-foot boundary to, go back to being what it was originally. So I'm not quite convinced that is a reason not to let that go back.
Yeah, certainly in some instances I would agree with that sentiment, but with the retaining wall only being 1 to 3 feet, it's under existing conditions not creating an adverse effect on the resource area, in my opinion.
I think what you're saying, Maureen, is, do we turn a blind eye yet again? Or do we send a powerful message by saying, no, in future, if you have this sort of infraction, you're going to have to remove it? So,
Well, I mean, that's what I'm looking at this. Obviously, I'm new to the game here, but I was looking at this and going, in the grand scheme, aren't we supposed to be worrying about the resource area? And yes, right now it's stabilized with something that's intrusive, and so yeah, it's been there, and I understand that, but I would like to hear why removing this retaining wall would be a long-term bad thing for the resource area, and of course, assuming that it's going to have the right kind of plantings done. And I just don't hear that. I respect what you're telling me, but but I don't hear that the resource area is getting top billing, and I think it should.
Yeah.
So I don't know I'm very curious to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, I know I appreciate the remediation plan. When I looked at it, I was hoping, I guess it would be more extensive considering that it's a structure that we have in there within the 25. Meaning hoping the buffer zone will go at least all the way up to the edge of our retaining wall. Removing the wire fence that's going through. And then I wasn't sure if you were going to address the pool fence, which I think does like zigzag the 50 a little bit.
It encroaches
Very little.
in a foot or two in a couple locations right here and there, but there's now native shrubs right up against the back of it, so we don't want to disturb that.
Okay.
And that wire fence is inclusive of you were talking right here.
Yeah, that it should come up above the retaining wall. Right, because that's,
Yeah, just marginally. That
Yeah.
corner.
From the newest flagging to the original, did anything change? Did the wetland get larger like we've been seeing?
The wetland you see here is the pre-existing.
The pre-existing
wetland,
from 80s or whatever it was?
No,
Late
I,
90s.
2005, I believe, is when the order was
Oh,
issued.
late 90s.
If I may. It looks like to me that the relative area of this retaining wall that's in the 25-foot buffer isn't a significant portion of the overall structure. And it looks like on the, I guess, the west side, or at least the left side of that section, there's ample room to push just that section back. I was wondering if there would be a possibility maybe to, instead of that being convex there, just make that small portion in the 25 concave and then bump up the planting plan and the restoration for the rest of the site so that we wouldn't have to disturb the whole area of the retaining wall, but we could get just that small section out of the 25-foot buffer area.
So that tree would have to get relocated as well.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's true.
I think that's a reasonable suggestion.
So, Seth, how much are you looking at?
It looks like maybe 20% of the wall. It's hard. If 15%, it's hard to say exactly. Just that portion that's in the 25.
So here's a photograph. This is
Yeah, that one mature tree relocated.
This is a larger blow-up of the area. And I think, just so I'm clear, you're suggesting relocating the portion of the retaining wall in the 25-foot buffer zone so that the whole retaining wall is at the 50-foot buffer.
Yeah, so just so this part in the 25-foot buffer bumps back into the lawn area. It's not a huge distance of wall, but I think that would talking about the long-term benefit for the resource area is huge.
Just don't talk over each other. Yeah, I mean, I thought about that and moving the wall. What I guess my feeling was, just in working on landscape sites, it would probably be easier to remove the whole wall than structurally kind of change one little piece, but that would have to come from who's doing the hardscaping. So I don't know.
I'm fine with mitigation plan.
I think I'd like to see the mitigation be beefed up more, because we keep getting these after the fact submissions, and I mean, this is in the 25 and 50.
Yeah,
So-
it's just so close. I guess I really, I appreciate you mentioning a mitigation thing, but I guess I'd rather bend over backward for the resource area as opposed to bend over backward for an existing retaining wall. I value those very differently, and I'm not saying you don't, but that's just where I come out.
We just need some direction.
If they pull the wall, will you do the mitigation planting still?
Yes,
Or is that, so that will go if the wall's in
Yes.
or not then?
yes. we agree to do all the planning, and we agree to expand the mitigation planning area if that's something the commission
Right.
wants us to do.
Maybe increasing the northern part of the mitigation planning to the 50-foot line?
Sure.
All the way to the 50, from where you're showing now at the 25. So another 25 feet.
Here too?
No.
No,
Just along
just
here.
along that wall.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So essentially, yeah.
You're
To be
increasing.
blunt, what I'm trying to clarify is, should we not only do that, but also relocate a portion of the wall in the 25 to the 50 line or not?
I mean, if you were willing to remove the retaining wall, that would be the best case scenario, I would say, and revegetate the slope naturally. I mean, I would absolutely think that would be the
If
best.
the commission's suggestion, recommendation is to remove the portion of the retaining wall in the 25-foot buffer zone and relocate it to the 50-foot line and expand the remediation mitigation planning area up to the 50, I think that's a reasonable suggestion that my clients could live with.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, now I'm confused. How much of a wall would be
You just mentioned relocating the retaining
Well,
wall.
right now, a small portion of the retaining wall is within the 25-foot
Yes,
buffer.
yes.
But it-
So what would be left to the?
So what I'm suggesting is that we take
One at a
the
time,
one at a
portion
time.
out
Sorry.
and move it over so that it's outside the 25-foot buffer zone.
But there'd still be a retaining wall, but further away
There'd still be a retaining wall in the 50-foot buffer
in the
zone.
50-foot buffer zone. I'm not clear why that would be necessary,
Yeah.
why you wanna rebuild it somewhere where it isn't, because that's also disturbing
Yeah, I would,
resource area. I guess I.
my
I-
feeling
Ms.
is,
Phillips, it addresses your point about the long-term repercussions here. If the concern is that you don't want to set a precedent to allow structures within the 25-foot buffer zone, we're willing to address that and take the structure out of the 25-foot buffer zone.
But the price is to put it back into the 50-foot buffer zone.
Where the rest of
Right.
the wall already is.
We probably would not have permitted this wall in the 50 in the first place, because
No,
it's
we
a
wouldn't
structure in the 50.
yeah.
Right.
Right, I mean,
And that's sort of always the fallback. Would we have permitted this in the first place? And I don't think we would have.
No.
If it's that short of a wall, they probably could have simply done a little bit of grading and stabilized that, I would think, if it's 1 or 2 feet.
Yeah.
The trouble is, we're penalizing the new owners. who-
what?
They bought it with
Ian?
this before
I
us.
understand. I just, it's just the King Solomon's dilemma all over again, So,
Well, let's,
I'm good with the it coming out of the 25, increasing the mitigation to the 50.
right, I sort of feel that. I mean, I totally take your point.
I understand, that it's in the 50.
But
We would not have
rebuilding,
permitted it.
oh, okay, but rebuilding the retaining wall in the 50 where we wouldn't, I mean, that's, moving it out of the 25, that's great, I'm glad you're willing to do that, and the mitigation plantings, I'm sure will be done properly. But I really don't get putting a retaining wall for what purpose, I'm not clear.
If we don't do that, we'll have a gap. So we'd like a continuous wall along the 50-foot buffer line.
Yeah, so, and I guess, and we're looking at a continuous slope. I mean, obviously, this is a difference of opinion and what, what would be best long-term for the resource area. I mean, I've said I've given my opinion, so I guess I can.
Well, one
That's
thing
what
the
I
wall, one thing the wall does do is it delineates then the 25 and will keep them from encroaching on the 25. I mean, it's way more than a split rail fence or some rocks. But that would be one benefit to the wall, would be keep people out of there.
right. especially if they increase the buffer planting.
I mean, we could take the whole wall out and not do any remediation. That's something the commission, but I think the most beneficial solution is to remove the portion of the wall in the 25-foot area, relocate it to the 50-foot line, and expand the remediation planning area. I mean, I think that's a reasonable approach for something that's been in effect, in place for more than 6 years. As Brian Madden said, it's established, and the least amount of disruption to that area seems to be the most benefit long-term to the wetland resource area.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the commission before I open it up to the public? Any comments from the public? Okay. So would you guys like to submit a revised plan moving the wall out of the 25 with increased buffer plantings?
Yes,
Okay.
we could continue, if the commission agrees, if we could continue this matter until August 28th in order to file a revised mitigation plan that shows an increased planting area up to the 50-foot line and relocation of the portion of the wall from the 25-foot area to the 50-foot. I would ask you to approve that continuance.
Okay. So this will continue until August 28th.
And while I'm at it, I'd ask you to continue the issuance of both certificates of compliance until 28 days after August 28th. Because if you issue an order on the 28th, we need to get through the appeal period, and those particular certificates of compliance won't be ripe for issuance until roughly the end of September, and I don't have the date.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't know the date on that meeting.
I'll figure it out.
Good.
And so I'm clear, so we'll get another proposal from you all in a month, in 4 weeks' time. And then that's going to show moving the 25-foot portion. You're gonna add new retaining wall within the 50 feet. That's what we're asking them to draw.
And increased mitigation
Oh,
planning.
no,
up to the 50 feet.
obviously,
Yeah. Both correct.
So, okay, because I disagree with that piece of it, so I don't know what to do about that. We just still have them bring it in, and then we talk about it next time?
Yep.
Is that, then we'll
Yep,
just?
we talk about the
we can-
resubmitted plan.
All right, that's good, okay, good.
Maureen,
Yeah.
if I may, Madam Chair? You want the wall removed in its entirety? Is that?
I think that would be the best thing, but certainly to remove it from the 25 and then add new wall elsewhere just seems crazy to me. I see no sense in that for the resource area. And, and time will take care of the slope, and this thing's only been there for 6 years, for heaven's sake. So I just don't see this as a historical landmark that needs to be retained, or, what have you. I guess it really bothers me.
Well, it
And I
may
really
make
don't
less sense to leave a gap in the wall. That may be more deleterious to the resource area than have a continuous.
Well, but then you have mitigation, you have mitigating planting on it.
So
I mean, it lived that way for a very long time before a completely foreign element, permanent foreign element was put in. And so I just, I hear what you're saying, but I do not see how that goes with protecting the resource area.
I respect your point of view. I take your point.
okay.
We do have a request to
Yes,
continue,
that's
and to
gonna
clarify that
continue.
date on the search, it is the 25th of September.
All right, so this will continue until August 28th, and Cambridge and certificates of compliance will continue until September 25th.
Great.
All right,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to James M. Goddick, 40 Squam Road.
Yeah, both.
Brian Madden from LEC Environmental Consultants, representing the applicant who's with me. James got it.
Madam Chair? So when I listened to the tape, half of it's more or less inaudible because people aren't speaking close enough to the microphone. And so I think we've got to address this issue.
We need a standing mic in here or something. The
It's
light's
green,
on.
yeah.
I think we need probably a standing mic that actually gets people, unfortunately.
Well
So
said.
please speak as closely to the microphone as possible.
And I'm half deaf, so the louder the better.
I will say that when I had to listen to the tapes, the two people I could always hear were Jeff and Brian.
I tried to talk loud. Appreciate that. Brian Madden from LEC. At the last meeting, the project was continued. We didn't have the natural heritage determination letter, which we now have received, which is reiterating a prior condition for the time of year restriction for the northern harrier breeding activities, March 1st through July 31st. No work within that period, commencing within that period unless pre-approved in writing by the division. And per Seth's recommendation, we wanted to extend that through August, which we had agreed to. So we have that determination letter. I know at the last meeting, there were some abutters who made some comments. I did submit a supplemental letter that kind of just readdressed some of those issues relative to potential adverse impacts in the resource areas. And as a recap, all the proposed structures are outside of the 50-foot buffer zone, nothing in the 25-foot. The pool is the only structure that doesn't meet the 2-foot separation to high groundwater. It is not within groundwater, it is above that. We've designed that specifically to avoid that encroachment.
But the separation still isn't there.
Correct.
Okay.
So the waiver is requested under the no adverse impact and no reasonable alternatives for the proposed project. Again, stormwater runoff from the proposed structures is being directed to a series of infiltration chambers located between the structures and Squam Road. The the proposed side slope is to be stabilized, and if the commission wants to see some typical specs of biodegradable erosion control blankets, we can certainly provide that. In the past, this is a pretty minimal slope to begin with, but if the commission would like to see, we've done in the past like a little toe berm at the end to capture any runoff. Same could be done at the top side, so you don't have any rainwater, surface water spilling over. It's all collected up in the roadway and lawn area and infiltrates. And I guess just to touch upon briefly some of the abutter comments, a lot of it seemed to be focused in on the crossing of Squam Pond in that intermittent stream, which is about 500 feet north of this project locus. The fact of the matter is
250 yards.
Okay, so a little more than 500. The fact of the matter is it's a roadway built in a wetland with an undersized culvert. That's why you have flooding issues in that location. We feel that the proposed project is being mitigated for stormwater for typical conservation requirements. There's no peak runoff or increased flow off-site, and everything is being contained on-site, and we feel the proposed project adequately protects kind of the wetland interests in play here are primarily flood control and groundwater recharge discharge. I guess I'll just turn it over to
If I may add a
Yeah.
couple of things, just one observation about the pool is that the deepest part of the pool we'd request be 6 feet, and obviously pools go to a shallow end, so only a portion of the pool will actually be within the 2-foot separation for the waiver purposes. Also, with respect to the distance of where Squam Creek floods, as he mentioned, the culvert down there, that is 250 yards to the north of this location to fairly far distance, and the road goes uphill from Squam Creek to where this location is. So I can't imagine, my main house is between Squam Creek and that culvert and this site, and if there was that much flooding, I'd be in serious trouble in the main house. So I've certainly never seen it. So
Yeah, and again, we're not in flood zone here. And there is, as I mentioned previously, there is a topo break between this area and the wetlands to the west. Kind of rises up and falls down.
I have a question for you, because it struck me when I was looking at this a few days ago. If you omitted the pool house and the pool was in that location, would you still have separation of groundwater issues, or would you avoid those?
I think we would still have them because there is a 35-foot setback off of the zoning setback. So the pool house is within the 100-foot buffer zone, so you'd still be within the 100-foot and require that waiver.
I just wasn't sure if it would still, if groundwater.
I will tell
Was
you
any
that
different?
where they dug the well is sort of, the test pit to check the water is roughly in this location here.
Okay.
The ground actually rises. There's sort of a depression here, so I think they dug it at the lowest point in the lot, or that end of my lot. And then in fact, if they had dug it over here, you might have increased separation. They didn't do that, so we're going obviously with where the lowest point where they dug. So if you switched it, you'd actually be lower for the pool.
Okay. I was just thinking of reasonable alternatives for you guys.
Yeah, no, that was something that we did look at, and I did put that in the letter that it's the front yard setback that really anything in that area is in the 100-foot buffer zone.
Okay.
I have a question, if I may.
Yep.
So I've been thinking a lot about reasonable alternatives in terms of the waiver request for this pool specifically. And you mentioned that only the deep end of this pool does not meet the separation to groundwater requirement. So has the applicant considered at all making a uniform depth pool at 4 feet? There would still be a pool, albeit a shallow pool, but you would be able to meet that separation of groundwater requirement without the waiver request.
Yeah, and just to put it in perspective, the pool is 18 by 36, so we're talking about probably a third of it is not meeting that 2-foot separation. That is something that we have discussed, but I look at it from a standpoint of, so we have an 18 by 20-foot max, or probably less than that, 10-foot area. That's your deep end. Somewhere around the ballpark of 200 square feet. That's above groundwater. I don't see an adverse impact of that structure being within that 2-foot separation. Jeff Blackwell at the last meeting talked about some of the history of including that 2-foot separation, and as far as I can recall, it was kind of like a fudge factor being factored in to give a little bit of cushion. We conducted a test pit out here to know exactly where that high groundwater was and design accordingly and avoid those impacts. And the waiver request as currently written, it speaks to the project as proposed. So the project is the pool, the garage, and the pool house as a combined holistic project.
Okay.
Staff can reiterate that point, but that's the way we analyze it. And we talked about deeper pools, and those were dismissed, and was encouraged to see that they were proceeding forward with a pool that didn't go into groundwater.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the commission? Good. All right, I'm going to open it up to public. Okay, RJ.
Yes, anyone has the green light.
Okay.
RJ Turcott, Nantucket Land Council. I'd just like to mention a reasonable alternative to the projects as presented. In regards to the pool, a partially above ground or above ground pool would give the applicant the pool they wanted without having to force a waiver to be permitted. A partially above ground pool properly constructed can be between 3 to 8 feet deep. And the other reasonable alternative is for the pool house to be on a slab foundation instead of a crawl space foundation. This would allow for there not to be any dewatering necessary there. And also at the end of its serviceable life, the pool house's serviceable life, it'd be much easier to remove and restore to what it once was than having an entire foundation. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I can answer. Just a clarification, the pool house, the crawl space foundation is meeting that 2-foot separation. And, you know, we did look into the pool and elevating that even higher. That would come at the cost of additional regrading, potentially increasing your limit of work. We wanted to keep that as minimal as possible.
But if you're above the 2-foot water level, you don't need to do water. You're not gonna even touch that.
Well, depending upon the time of year that this is
Yeah,
built,
but-
I mean, excluding the spring, I'd be surprised if you would need to de-water anyways. I don't think they would want to build it in the spring.
No.
I'm not doing
We can't, with the MISA restriction starting in March, we can't, right? I
Uh,
mean, we could continue, we could get the waiver, but we're not gonna do it.
Okay. Any other comments from the public? Yes.
My name is Rick Atherton, and I appeared before you at the last meeting where this project at 40 Squam was heard. Our residence is up the road. We're not in a butter. There are letters that have been sent to you. They're probably not, you may not have had a chance to read them all. So I thought I would just at least distribute so you do have them physically in your possession. And the letters were written by myself as one, Howard Blitman is another is Roby Blumenstein, and another is Tony Cahill. The other three are closer to the project than I am, and only one I think is a direct abutter, but the others are all close. So. And sorry for the delay on getting these to you for your regular cutoff time. A lot of these folks are seasonal residents, and they're not here all the time, and meeting the deadlines are not easy, and they can't attend the meeting today, but I can. So.
Thank you, Rick.
Perfect. I think you'll find when you have a chance to read these, I'm not sure you've had that chance. There's a lot of material you have to go through, and I sympathize with you on that. The general tone of each of the letters, however, I think is somewhat similar. We're concerned that this is an area that could very well be subject to flooding. Those of us who live on Squam Road know that the road can become impassable, and that's why we did circulate the one picture for you. It's not just the culvert, the water rises on both sides and backs up into the swamp on the west side of Squam Road. I haven't been back in there to know how far and what areas it covers, but it's clearly significant. I think that gives us concern about a project like this and the request for waivers. It seems in general that this is a fairly intense development on the southern end of the lot, and it's difficult to understand why waivers should be granted under the circumstances. The written submission said there are no reasonable conditions or alternatives that would allow the project to proceed in compliance with the regulations. And you know, I find in a general way that a lot of your applications use such language. They say, here's our submission, here's our plan, and there are no reasonable conditions, when there are clearly, obviously, alternative plans that could be presented to you, but they're not presented to you. And it puts you in a difficult position of having to say, gee, what if you did this? What if you did that? I think under some of these circumstances, you should consider saying no to the application and say that they should come back with alternative development that do not require a waiver. I just point out one other thing. It's not so much in your jurisdiction, but there is a second curb cut on the lot. There's a garage and a curb cut up at the main house. And curb cuts are not authorized unless they're approved by the planning board. I think most of us know that. I don't know whether there's been an application to the planning board in this case, and what they will do with such a request, I'm not sure. I think Squam, I can speak in general for, I know most of the residents on Squam Road quite well. Curb cuts are an important issue, and I think a precedent of a curb cut here would not be helpful. I know that at the last meeting, one of the commissioners mentioned that it might be necessary to accommodate the pool being emptied or maintenance on the pool. But if indeed that was the case, you could always have it gated off and only available for that kind of an activity, not a regular curb cut with a second garage. I think those are the general concerns, and we appreciate your attention to the matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just had a kind of a question or comment. This is one of the very few times I've ever had Heritage come down on the side of the Harriers, even though they're common on the island. And I just wonder, is there a record of a nest in this vicinity or something that they know about?
I haven't looked too closely at nesting records around Squam Swamp, but I think this is kind of a trend that they've moved in the last couple of years, where they're imposing this restriction a little bit more in case there is breeding activity. We do know, you could probably speak to this, that if they are nesting in Squam Swamp, they're a little bit more tolerant nesting in wetlands to residential activity in closer proximity. I don't know exactly where that nest is, but through my conversations with Heritage on a number of projects that don't ever come before you guys, this is a kind of a recent trend, just as an additional precautionary measure.
Good.
And I just want to, in response to a couple of the comments, there is no intent for a curb cut here. Obviously, that's a whole different process with the planning board, and its references are, but it's really intended for storage. There is a garage, a one-car garage up in the main house, so got to have someplace to put the pool stuff.
I have a question. I just quickly glanced at these letters that Rick just left with us, and I wasn't clear, and that's something I was going to ask you anyway. A pool house. What does that include? Plumbing? Does it have bedrooms? What's in a pool house? I grew up in Los Angeles, and pool houses had racks for towels, and so I don't know what this is. If there's more than racks for towels, I'd like to know what else is going on in there.
Sure. Essentially, it's a pool house for the pool people to change, etc. If in the future I decide to, and I believe, and Dawn, correct me if I say something incorrect, because I don't know the rules as well as you guys do. It's a 4-bedroom main house that if I decide that I want to put in a bedroom in this location versus, and maybe a bathroom, I have basically 4-bedroom septic. I have to remove a bedroom from the main house, and I have to go through the appropriate approval process with Planning Board and Board of Health, I think.
Building Department and Board of Health. He would have to change the floor plan to completely eliminate a bedroom because it's a 4-bedroom IA system, and it will never be more than a 4-bedroom IA system. And there can't even be a bathroom put into that structure without
going through that process.
At least a full bathroom.
I just wondered, because there's a grinder pump and a force main coming out of the pool house, which I thought meant that there must at least be a bathroom in there.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a shower.
Jeff Blackwell recommended that we include everything that we could potentially have in the future should we obtain the permits to get that. So don't have to come back to get an amended order of conditions or otherwise have to get something permitted in that context. And it's a process. You start where you start, and then you move up the ladder as you go, depending upon what as the plans change.
And this has received HGC approval.
Yes.
You know, I appreciate the comments from the applicant because I think that helps sort of clarify. Again, I'm not a pool house expert, but there's 1,000 square foot footprint here on the pool house and a second floor. And the plans, I think, that went to the HDC pointed out there was a future possible bathroom on the second floor and a bathroom on the first floor. This, it just seems to me, and I appreciate the applicant being upfront, that it may change its configuration in the future, but that goes back to the issue of waivers and the intensity of the development in a sensitive area. And I just don't see how waivers are appropriate given the desires here when there are alternatives. And so I just bring that again to your attention.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would appreciate actually seeing some of the alternatives on a plan or on paper with a pool that wouldn't require a waiver, whether that be raised or not have a deep end.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly to the extent that you know, we make up a sort of traditional lap pool that's 4 feet in depth, and I think it might be a little longer, so I assume that there's room within the various setbacks. That's one alternative. Also adding more fill. So, I mean, those are certainly alternatives. And it's up to the commission to decide what is the most palatable. Obviously, if we go to a 4-foot pool, that doesn't even require a waiver.
Right.
I'd have to elongate the pool because I'd like to make it a traditional lap pool. So someone who, I don't do laps in a pool, but people who do, I think they have a traditional size, if I'm not mistaken. You know, width of lanes and total width before you have to turn and go back the other way. But I'm certainly open to constructive, you know, comments or additions.
I guess I have to say, I'm not really clear why we have that 2-foot separation waiver required. As long as this pool is out of the groundwater, it's not sitting down in it, to me that relieves a lot of the issues of interfering with the flow of the groundwater, or, you know, if the pool breaks, the water coming in, you know, hydrostatic pressure trying to pop the pool out of the ground. I'm more concerned with pools, especially in an area like this, of how they get drained.
Right.
You know, making sure there's limits on chemical use by, you know, time of year. But otherwise, you know, some of the issues brought up, the amount of structure in the lot is more a building department or a planning department's concern about how much footprint is allowed. We've never had issues that I know of that says, I mean, in certain cases we might, but you know, they're meeting the basic requirements of having everything outside the 50. And
well, Ernie, my understanding is that we have a 2-foot separation because it's an average, because of fluctuations in groundwater, and you know, and the fact is it's been determined that it does interfere with groundwater flow if it protrudes into the groundwater. So I would be very comfortable to see an alternative that we don't have to grant a waiver to, rather than asking that sort of fundamental question of why do we have the 2-foot groundwater separation in the first place.
I guess if it's not 2-foot separation to average groundwater, it's 2-foot separation to high groundwater. And if there is groundwater fluctuation, I would assume it's, at least at this stage of the game, it's not getting any higher than that. And I don't know. I mean, maybe it does, and it's just not up there enough to leave an imprint in the soil profile.
Right. When did you do your test bit?
It was done in June, correct?
So, I don't know, I can't remember.
Yes,
There's a lot
but
of letter.
we're not looking at where
Yeah.
groundwater observed, it's the modeling of the soils, and Blackwell is well adept at identifying those features. I mean, this is similar to, septic perk tests and designing that system accordingly to meet those separation high groundwater. So they look at it very carefully.
And as I mentioned, the location of the test pit is lower, it's sort of the lowest part of the lot at that end, and the pool is maybe, I don't know, is higher. Since it goes up towards the place where there's a, up gradient sort of berm that goes then over into the wetlands.
Deanne?
And again, I frankly, the 6-foot pool, because I like to dive off the end of the pool, I don't wanna injure myself, and I'm not a lap pool guy, but listen, I'm thinking about myself versus people who like to do laps, so I'm, amenable other way.
Deanne Atherton, and I just have a question, a point of clarification. At the last hearing, the initial hearing, you talked about draining the pool and that there would have to be some arrangements made where the water would be put into a truck, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I haven't looked, I don't know where these plans are, so the access and would come in this access, which does not exist. So as a point of clarification, I just wanted to ask the applicant, you do not have approval for this second access, is that correct?
There is no second access. There's a break in the vegetation, and that's what that shows. So, for example, when they mow the lot, the Concom graciously gave me a permit to clear.
Yes.
That's where they go in and out to clear the lot, to do the clearing.
I understand that. Then how would any vehicles get into this garage?
It's not a garage. It's actually a shed. It's just mislabeled.
Well, they just bring a pump in, a pipe that goes out to the pool.
So how would the pool be, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I mean to Madam Chairman, to you, then how would the pool be? In other words, the only
Yeah.
vehicular access to this entire property is here, and there's an existing garage here. So I think one of the concerns is where do the vehicles access this area of development to service the pool or for anything else? And when we looked at this, it looked to us from the plans that the applicant was going to ask for a second access.
Right, which unfortunately that's not
our
within our purview.
Correct, but if what you approve is dependent upon vehicle access there.
It's not, Deanne.
Yeah.
If I interrupt, the vehicle would probably have to pull off to the side of Squam Road or, park at Squam Road. And then either they could take a portable pump and set it by the pool and run soft hose up to the truck, or they could take a long section of what's called hard suction hose and just run that all the way down to the pool. And they're not gonna be gaining any elevation, so there's not a problem with, pumping water. I mean, we do it on the fire crew all the time in situations just like this, and
There's
we-
no
that would be-
parking, Ernie, on Swan Road. It's purposely a country area. There's only usually one access to each property. There's no parking on an abutters road. We try and keep it very narrow. So I just wanted to raise that. I was unclear when I looked at the plans. It looked to me like a second access, so thank you for the clarification.
So
So-
just to kind of clarify that point once and for all for everybody, one of the conditions that goes out with every permit that's issued by the Conservation Commission, there's always a standard condition that any applicant is required to get all other applicable permits. So if there's something that requires another board's approval, if they're not able to get that permit, then they either have to come back and modify or amend the existing permit, or they just can't do the project. So it's dependent upon all of them. So it's one of those where, we need to stay within the scope of the Wetlands Protection Act and some of the things that are more appropriate to planning or zoning or building or health. Well, you know, sometimes interesting and understanding everything in totality isn't necessarily something that can be conditioned or is really within the jurisdiction of the board to really contemplate. So if it's a break in vegetation or a formal access way, currently they're not proposing any sort of enhancement in that space. So if that needed to change for a different permit or something, they'd have to come back. So, or if you have impose a condition, and I think this has always been the case, if the commission imposes a condition on an applicant to gain the permit, I hate to say it this way, but it's their problem to figure out how to make that work. And if they can't make that work, then they're in violation of their permit. Or if they can figure it out and it's mildly inconvenient, well, it's mildly inconvenient, but that's the condition of the permit. So it's, you know, I don't think a lot of conditions are necessarily overly convenient, but that's the rules of the permit. That's the rules you have to adhere to. So that's a logistic for them to figure out.
Certainly any sort of reasonable, consistently applied conditions that you impose are perfectly appropriate. I mean, if they've been, asked of other people and other people have done it and it's, feasible, I'm certainly happy to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would require any time the pool gets drained, even that, like, whatever that drain down is every year, that it would be trucked off. So if there is some issue with a truck accessing, then that would be a problem with your permit.
Well, again, they could easily take a portable pump and put it
Right.
at the pool and run
Right.
soft hose. I've run soft hose hundreds of feet uphill and pumped water successfully. And I mean, it's not
There's
logistically
actually, there's
impossible.
space to pull in here if they needed to temporarily, and frankly, they could go into my driveway. I mean, it's, again, if it's reasonable and it's been, applied to other people and it's consistent and not arbitrary, I'm happy to do whatever you folks want me to do.
Well, it's not our purview really, but I'm puzzled why you say proposed garage if you've now just told us that it's a shed.
I'm sorry?
Well, it says proposed garage, and yet you've just said that in fact it's a shed. So why doesn't it say proposed shed?
You'll have to ask Jeff Blackwell that question.
Okay, well, anyway, I would like to see that they come back with an alternative where we don't have to grant a waiver.
Yeah, I would agree with that if
Me as
possible.
Sorry? No, I mean, I'm happy if you want to. Are you talking about a 4-foot lap pool? I mean, so long as I can make it a traditional lap pool, so people can, which I think there's room. Do you think is there room? And I don't know what the length. I mean, this shows 18 by 36. If I'm going from a 6-foot to a uniform 4-foot depth, I mean, I don't know what people do. 40 feet, 48 feet.
I mean, some people just don't have pools. So this is like on Brian, I guess, to sharpen the pencil again and show us what you're coming back with, would be my feeling on this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not ours to determine this is a long enough lap pool or, we just would rather see this come without a waiver if possible.
We can certainly take a look and see what's available. Again, I go back to the point of, again, this just being the deep end of the pool outside of groundwater. I'm just struggling trying to wrap my head around how this is going to result in an adverse impact to the resource area and somehow compromise the interests of flood control.
And I guess just to help us formulate this, and if I can ask the question, just tell me, in the past, if you guys have granted waivers, and if there have been some circumstances where you haven't granted waivers, what's the distinguishing characteristic between the two, so I could sort of be guided in how we look at this?
So I think part of what's happening here is we have a new board, so we have individuals looking at these waivers more critically, and the waiver does say no reasonable alternative. So if you don't, we need to see that presentation in order to say, yes, this justifies the waiver. There's no alternative. But we've heard tonight that there are alternatives that we would like to see so that we can make that justification, that there's truly no alternative here.
And in terms of alternatives, I mean, I heard the 4-foot uniform depth. Were there other alternatives? So when we go back and, as you say, we sharpen the pencil with Jeff and with Brian, or if Dawn can weigh in.
Can you state your name and speak into the mic, please?
I work for the applicant. I guess my question is, could the plan be approved tonight if he removes the waiver requirement with the pool in its current configuration?
Well, conditioned upon a 4-foot pool.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Question about, I mean, is this pool, it's within 2 feet, but how close to 2 feet is it? If it's only within 1 foot, then you just have to come up a foot. You don't have to come up 2 feet to get out of that 2-foot separation.
It's right above it.
Okay, so it's right at, okay, so then you do have to come up
I
2
mean,
feet.
so, you know, in theory, you go up 2 more feet in fill, you go from 4 feet to 6 feet of fill, or, you know, you go 5 feet of fill and you reduce the pool to 5 feet, or, you know, some combination, or you go to 4, and then the waiver issue's gone, so.
Right. And there's also the alternative, I don't know that's ever been done on Nantucket, but the representative from the Land Council mentioned having some of it be above ground, and there must be a way to landscape that. I mean, above ground pools are not something that we see on Nantucket, but if it could be landscaped, you know, I'm not saying you guys have to do this, but I'm just thinking we need to really look at alternatives, and I think that's something, you know, I'm not saying you have to do that, but I just, you know, there are alternatives. I guess I'm supporting your position.
Right. I think we have another comment from the public.